Out of 24 presidents that were expected to attend the Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, only 15 jetted in the country. And why is it that out of 55 countries in Africa, only 15 were interested in the African Climate Summit? And it is a very clear observation that the continent was not ready and did not embrace the chit-chat about the climate decline. Someone made a very serious joke that if this summit was being held somewhere in Dubai, in US or in UK, you'll see African presidents flying in their numbers to attend the summit, even if they were going to be bungled in one bus, because there is some per diem, some allowances, and also an opportunity to do some shopping. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bold Analysis. The official photo is what you're seeing there. That is the photo of the African presidents that attended the summit. As the curtain falls on that first ever summit in the African soil, there is, I followed speeches yesterday, and there is one contagious point that has emerged, that the summit turned to be a theater of blames of the West this and the West that. And the second observation here is the African presidents, led by President William Ruto, they were most centered and focused on the global financial architecture, funding Africa and resources on fighting climate change in the African continent, but oblivious of the local interventions that the country make, that African countries can even make to mitigate the climate decline. What are we talking about? Just recently in this country, we had a discussion about government lifting the ban on logging from our forests. We have our forest cover. We are currently running a program on planting trees. It did not appear anywhere in the talks. What is each country doing to mitigate climate change? You'll realize that that session did not come out clearly, or that point did not come out clearly, where a country rises and says, this is what we are doing in our governance. This is what we have decided to do. I want you to listen to these three speeches. One is starting by what William Ruto said about the architecture of global financing.
If you must die, it is better to die of debt than to die of poverty. Because you are dying anyway. So to contextualize that into this debate, we don't want to die in this continent. We don't want to die of debt, but we also don't want to die of poverty. That is why we must have a conversation around multilateral development banks and concessional financing, and how we can finance our economies using resources that do not punish us. And when we make this proposition, we have tremendous respect for our multilateral development banks. They are doing their best. We have the best of respect for them.
Listening to William Ruto's statement, you'll even confuse whether it is a climate summit or some summit on economy of Africa. He spoke more about the debt restructure and how the interest rates are exorbitant when Africa is getting loans from Europe. Then that is why you wonder, was it about, Africa lost its bargain, and I'm going to explain that. I want you to compare that with what Kagame said and the pitch about Africa needs to do something and what Rwanda is doing and the strides that Rwanda have made. I want you to compare, because I'm picking those two, they're both from East Africa, the two presidents from East Africa. And there is that intervention. You could listen to what Kagame pitch on what Rwanda has done.
In Rwanda, we want the private sector to play a greater role in building a green economy. Our strategy is to position ourselves as an attractive destination for international climate financing and investment. That's why the COP27, at that summit, Rwanda launched Ireme Invest, a green investment facility created by the Rwanda Green Fund in partnership with the Development Bank of Rwanda.
When you compare the two, you'll get a clear-cut line in terms of what we have done at Rwanda. And it looks like the country's individual effort. In our country, I am not saying we have not done anything, but we have a project of planting trees to boost the forest cover. And so I expected that was a pitch to be made for the global leaders if we have the confidence that that which we are doing is something that is working towards the same. Now, more Ibrahim capped the whole, and I think his speech was more captivating and more, I think it was a good lecture for the African leaders to listen to. And he lectured the African presidents and African leaders on this probably lack of bargain from the Europe. But I'll tell you why they cannot bargain. Get this from Mo Ibrahim.
A silver bullet to solve this problem. And we are just like dodging all that to talk about, how we can get more money for climate finance. Just tax carbon. Use the market. You guys in the rich countries taught us about, you invented capitalism, invented market. Why aren't you applying market forces to carbon? Why? And that is the question, because the problem now is that people make promises. Those poor guys in Africa and somewhere else, they have a problem there. Okay, well, we are kind people, we're going to offer them some money. How about $100 billion for climate fight? But then, actually, things are tight. Sorry, we cannot make it this year. Well, in those guys' mind, it's charity. It's charity. And that's a mistake. It should not be charity. This should be an international clear agreement. You break it, you own it. That is the honest answer. Without changing the market dynamic, will not change. You know what? All of us politicians, we know what to do. But we don't know how to get elected if we do it. And that is the problem. That is the problem. We have a lot of politicians want to be elected, but nothing will happen then. So nothing happens.
Now, there's that which he said, and I like the last part he's saying. African leaders, we know what we are supposed to do, but we don't know how we will get re-elected if we do it. That is our problem. That is our problem. And number two, he's talking about carbon emissions. And at this point, let me explain for you. I know there is a term that has largely been used. It has been dominating in this summit, and even those who have been following the climate discussions. there is this word carbon credits, and people have been asking, so what is carbon credits? Is it a loan? Is it some loan or something? Now, carbon credits is also known as carbon offsets. Now, these are permits that allow the owner of a company or a farm to emit a certain amount of carbon dioxide or other gases or other greenhouse gases. One credit permits the emission of 1 ton of carbon dioxide or the equivalent in other greenhouse gases. So 1 credit. So if you have, and that's what Ibrahim was saying, that if you have 17 credits, then it means you can emit 17 tons. 17 tons, and the global standard is 24. So you cannot emit beyond 24. That is what he's saying. And he's saying that that's what African leaders are complaining, that the carbon credit, which is the proponents of carbon credit system say that it leads to measurable, verifiable emission reductions from certified climate action projects, and that these projects reduce, remove, and avoid greenhouse gas. So the companies that produce more credits are actually supposed to, of course, produce more, give more. That's what Mo is saying, that what US, and if you follow that summit, you realize that there are a lot of headlines on African presidents getting some billions, and different organizations getting billions. There are a lot of sidelines, deals that were signed in the sidelines with billions being given. He's saying, instead of us depending on billions given as charity, we should actually have a stronger bargain so that we use tax. And is telling Europe that instead of sitting somewhere and packaging it as presidential offer to the African, where Biden has given Kenya or Biden has given us Africa, which is seen as charity and aid, and they are not under any obligation to do it, because there have been a lot of huge promises from Europe about what we are giving or their commitments, but somewhere in the middle of all this, that commitment is not obeyed because someone will say, I could not be in a position to maybe meet that obligation. So that's what Mo Ibrahim is saying. Instead of Africa crying and of course depending on these donations as charity, they should just tell the company that they have a tax. And I think William Ruto mentioned about it. They just tax the carbon emission, they just tax those companies. But I'll tell you the big problem, why Africa cannot have a strong bargain, why our bargain against the West is weak, even though the summit was centered around what the West is doing right and what the West is doing wrong. These three weaknesses. Even Europe understands that we need money to fatten ourselves and not interested in the climate change. The billions that have been given, I listened to our President William Ruto saying that there's some 50 billions lying in central bank. I think, let's get that soundbite.
But now I have another problem, because many people are telling me now, you're spoiling governors with a lot of money. Because, as I talk to you, there is 50 billion Kenya shillings lying at the central bank. My request to you is please spend this money. Yeah.
Now, that's what I was saying. The president was saying there's some 50 billions lying, in central bank for governance. Even Europe, the reason why they're giving us this money, they know, number one, we're not going to use this money on climate mitigation or what. All that we're saying we are going to do. This money is going to people's pockets, just going to individuals. For example, let me say, there are a lot of allocation that has been done for planting trees. Can you say, and planting trees is an intervention to increase forest cover, but can you really explain that money is the amount of trees, or rather the percentage of trees that have been planted is commensurate to amount of money that has been set aside for that project? So even them, they know very well that this money is not, Africa is not interested. These leaders are not interested in this climate. Even these ones that are going there, they're just so happy with how they're going to scoop their allowances, how that money is going to be corrupted and taken to, it's just a it's a conduit of corruption for the African leaders, and the West knows that. So that's why they're even playing picky-ponky with this money. Number two, Africa lacks the bargain power because we are, by default, key beneficiaries of industrial revolution in Europe. I want to explain that. Europe exports its labor market, its labor from Africa. And Kenya being the largest producer of labor, I think skilled labor. Kenya, I think that is Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. And so, they are employing us in those companies. So to some extent, they're also helping provide jobs. You will see how government will splash headlines and even launch a project on how people are getting absorbed, the job opportunities in Europe. And those companies that are producing carbon dioxide, that are large carbon emissions, are actually producing products that are exported back in Africa. And Africa are in dire need of those carbon products. Lithium. We have minerals in the continent. Majorly, and I think the West Africa. Nearly 94% or 99% of companies that are extracting minerals in Africa are not in Africa. They are owned, managed from Europe. 70%, I think even 90% of minerals here that are being extracted in Africa are not being processed here. Even in Kenya, we are extracting oil from Turkana, but we are not refining and processing that oil here. It's exported, refined, then we export it back. So that's why we are actually saying that we are captives. The argument of tax and increase the tax on these companies that are producing that carbon dioxide, it is very weak for the Africa to bargain on that ground because we are actually beneficiaries of finished products from those companies. Number three, which was really mentioned by the last speaker that I mentioned in this podcast. African leaders are more interested in how to maintain power and cannot formulate local interventions that can even go against populations. Let me use a the most usual one, easy example. Lifting the ban on lodging in the forest and it is an intervention that it was a populist one because the government, and this is through the lips of Rigathi Gachagua, explained that why are trees there and there are people that need them, that it can be used as an income generating activity for some people. And because we want to create some, or under the guise of creating jobs, so that we don't antagonize or we please the voting constituency, we want to lift the ban on forest lodging. But we are not oblivious of the risk that that ban, if it is lifted, it can be abused. So even if you plant 1,000 trees, if you look at the impact, it is not going to work. Now, Africa needs to be involved in the research and all that. But the truth of the matter here is, locally, just local interventions. What is Kenya doing, for example? What is Kenya doing? A lot of unroadworthy cars in our roads. Carbon emissions. Emitting carbon. Nairobi here, where this summit was being held, we have Nairobi River. We created even a commission to cleaning of Nairobi River. What have we done so far? Let's look at the dump site management. Are they to the standards, in the international standards, that really align with principles of climate decline? And this is my point, that we restricted or we reduced the summit to a blame theater of the West. But in real sense, We also needed to open our eyes and ask ourselves the tough questions. As Africa, what are we doing to save the situation? Because the companies that we want to give money are not going to give us in terms of taxes. The taxes are not going to be imposed. And if it is imposed, that money will get back to the Europe government. And then it will be given to us as charity. Thank you. I tend to believe over climate summit. That has been my best podcast. You can rate it. Thank you, guys. And I want to say thank you for those who, I think I received some tea yesterday from Kindaruma. Thank you. And of course, as you fly back to your country or as you jet in, we ask for safe journey masses. Thank you.